The morning sky over Seoul turned dark as massive ships blocked out the sun. People stopped walking and stared up at the alien vessels that hung in the air like metal mountains. Cars stopped moving. Children pointed and asked their parents what was happening. Nobody had an answer. The largest ship landed in the center of the city with a sound like thunder. The ground shook. Windows rattled in buildings for miles around. From the ship came creatures that walked on two legs but looked nothing like humans. They were tall and thin with gray skin that seemed to shine in the light. Their eyes were black and their mouths had no lips. One of the aliens stepped forward. It wore a silver robe that moved like water. When it spoke, its voice came from speakers that appeared in the air around the city. Everyone could hear it perfectly, even though it spoke in a language no human had ever heard before. But somehow, everyone understood the words. "I am Ambassador Vextar of the Dominion Alliance," the alien said. "We have come to give your species one chance to prove you deserve to exist." President Dae-ho was rushed to the emergency bunker deep under the government building. The room filled quickly with generals, ministers, and scientists. Everyone was talking at once, but nobody knew what to do. This was not something they had trained for. "Silence!" General Mi-young shouted. She was a small woman, but her voice could quiet a room full of arguing men. "Let's hear what they want." On the big screen in the room, they could see Ambassador Vextar still speaking to the world. The aliens' black eyes seemed to look right through the camera and into their souls. "Your species has spread across your world like a disease," Vextar continued. "You fight each other. You destroy your planet. You have no honor. But the Dominion is fair. We will give you one opportunity to prove you are worthy of life." The high alien raised one long, thin arm. Behind it, the ship opened with a hiss of steam. Something walked out that made everyone watching gasp in fear. It was huge, maybe 12 feet tall. Its skin was black like polished stone, and red light glowed from its eyes. When it moved, the ground cracked under its feet. Even through the TV screen, people felt afraid just looking at it. "This is Keth Mora, champion of the Dominion," Vextar said. "He has never been defeated. He has conquered 17 worlds. Your species will choose one fighter to face him in single combat. If your champion wins, we will leave your world in peace. If he loses, your species will be enslaved or destroyed." The screen went black. The city fell silent. Around the world, people stared at their televisions and phones trying to understand what had just happened. In the bunker, President Dae-ho looked around the room at his advisors. Defense Minister So-jin was the first to speak. "We need to send Captain Hyun-woo," she said. "He's our best enhanced soldier. His body has been improved with cybernetic parts. He's faster and stronger than any normal human." General Mi-young shook her head. "No, we should send Tai-min. He won the Global Combat League 5 years in a row. His genes have been changed to make him the perfect fighter. He's never lost a match." The argument began immediately. Everyone had a different idea about who should represent humanity. Some wanted to send a team of fighters. Others suggested using their most advanced weapons. A few thought they should try to negotiate instead of fighting. President Dae-ho listened to the arguing for an hour before he raised his hand for quiet. "How long do we have to decide?" An aide checked his computer. "The alien said 72 hours, sir." "Then we have time to think about this carefully," Dae-ho said. "I want every option explored. Find me every fighter, every soldier, every martial artist on Earth, someone who can face that monster and win." While the world's leaders argued about champions and weapons, life continued as normal in a small village in the mountains. Jin-ho knelt in his grandmother's garden, pulling weeds from around the tomato plants. The soil was dark and rich between his fingers. The smell of growing things filled his nose. His grandmother Sunja sat on the porch watching him work. She was 83 years old and had lived through wars, famines, and the rise of the modern world. Her hands were wrinkled, but her eyes were still sharp. "The tomatoes will be ready soon," Jin-Ho said without looking up from his work. "Good," Soon-Ja replied. "The Kim family will want some for their daughter's wedding." Jin-Ho smiled. He had been living with his grandmother for 3 years now, ever since he left the military. The village was small and quiet. Everyone knew everyone else. Children played in the streets. Old men sat in the tea house and told stories. It was peaceful. Very few people in the village knew that Jin-Ho had once been a special forces soldier. He had served for 8 years, fighting in conflicts around the world. He had been decorated for bravery, promoted quickly, and respected by his men. But one day, he had walked away from it all. Soon-Ja knew, of course. Grandmothers always know. But she never asked him about the past. She just let him work in her garden and find peace among the growing things. "Jin-Ho," she said now, "come sit with me for a moment." He wiped his hands on his pants and sat on the porch steps beside her chair. Soon-Ja pointed up at the sky, where the alien ships were visible even from their mountain village. "Do you think they will really destroy us?" she asked. Jin-Ho had been trying not to think about the alien announcement. The village had one old television in the community center, and he had watched the broadcast with the other villagers. Everyone had been scared and confused. "I don't know, Grandmother," he said honestly. "Maybe our leaders will find a way to make peace." Soon-Ja nodded slowly. "Peace is always better than war," she said. "But sometimes war finds you whether you want it or not." She was quiet for a long moment, looking at the alien ships in the distance. Then she spoke again, so softly that Jin-Ho had to lean closer to hear her. "During the war, when I was young, there was a soldier who saved our village. He didn't fight because he hated the enemy. He fought because he loved us. There's a difference, you know." Jin-Ho looked at his grandmother's weathered face. Sometimes she said things that seemed simple, but carried deeper meaning. This felt like one of those times. "What happened to him?" Jin-Ho asked. "He lived," Soon-Ja said with a small smile. "The ones who fight from love usually do." As the sun set behind the mountains, grandmother and grandson sat together in comfortable silence. Neither of them knew that in less than 24 hours, their quiet life would change forever. Neither of them knew that the fate of the entire human race would soon rest in Jin-Ho's gentle hands. In Seoul, the arguments continued. Experts debated, scientists analyzed, military leaders planned, but none of them had yet considered that humanity's greatest strength might not be found in their enhanced soldiers or advanced weapons. Sometimes the most powerful warriors are the ones who fight not to destroy, but to protect. Dr. Yoonji had not slept in 36 hours. Her office at the Seoul Research Institute was filled with empty coffee cups and papers covered in notes. On her computer screen, she played the alien broadcast over and over again, studying every detail of the creature called Keth Mora. Most people saw a monster when they looked at the alien champion. Yoonji saw something different. She was a xenobiologist, someone who studied alien life forms, though until 2 days ago, she had only studied theoretical aliens. Now she had a real one to examine, even if only through video. "There," she whispered to herself, pausing the video at the moment when Keth Mora first appeared. She zoomed in on the creature's eyes. The red glow was not just decoration. It pulsed with a rhythm, like a heartbeat. She had been measuring the pulse when she noticed something strange. In the crowd of people watching the alien announcement, those closest to Keth Mora had started backing away before he even moved. Their faces showed fear, but it was more than normal fear. It was panic, the kind that makes people run without thinking. Yoonji picked up her phone and called her colleague. "Dr. Yoo-jin at the university. I need you to analyze something," she said without saying hello. "The alien champion? I think he has some kind of psychic ability." "Psychic?" Yoo-jin sounded tired. Everyone was tired. Yunji, we need to focus on how to beat this thing physically, not worry about science fiction. It's not science fiction if it's standing in our capital city, Yunji replied. Look at the footage again. Watch the crowd's reaction. People were afraid before they had any reason to be afraid. She heard Yujin typing on his computer. After a few minutes, he spoke again, his voice more serious. You might be right. The brainwave readings from people near the landing site show patterns I've never seen before. Fear responses that are too strong, too immediate. Yunji felt her heart race with excitement and terror. Yujin, what if this creature feeds on fear? What if he gets stronger when his opponents are afraid? That would explain how he's never been defeated, Yujin said quietly. Every warrior who faced him would have made him more powerful just by being scared. Yunji hung up and immediately called the emergency government line. It took 15 minutes and 3 transfers before she reached someone who would listen to her theory. 20 minutes later, a military car arrived at her office. Captain Hai Wan was a serious woman with short black hair and intelligent eyes. She listened to Yunji's explanation without interrupting, taking notes on a small tablet. So you're saying, our enhanced soldiers would actually be the worst choice to fight this thing? Hai Wan asked, when Yunji finished. Yes, Yunji said firmly. Enhanced soldiers are trained to be aggressive, to dominate their enemies. That aggression would feed this creature and make it stronger. We need someone who fights differently. Fights how? Yunji had been thinking about this question all night. Someone who fights not from anger or hate, but from something else. Someone who protects rather than attacks. Captain Hai Wan looked skeptical. Doctor, this isn't a philosophy class. We need someone who can actually win. That's exactly what we need, Yunji insisted. Look, I've been studying the recordings of Kethmora's previous battles. The creatures he fought were all warriors focused on victory and domination. They all approached the fight the same way, and they all failed the same way. She pulled up a video on her computer showing one of the alien champions' previous victories. A massive insect-like creature had attacked with pure fury, its mandibles snapping and claws slashing. Kethmora had seemed to grow larger and more powerful as the fight continued, until he crushed his opponent with ease. See how he gets stronger as the fight goes on? Yunji pointed to the screen. He's feeding on his opponent's aggressive emotions. Captain. Hai Wan studied the video carefully. What kind of person fights without aggression? Yunji had already been researching this question. She had access to military databases and psychological profiles of every soldier on Earth. She had been looking for someone with the right combination of skills and mindset. I found someone, she said, pulling up a file on her computer. His name is Jin Ho, former Special Forces, served for 8 years. His record is interesting. Captain Hai Wan read the file over Yunji's shoulder. It says here he killed 43 enemy combatants and saved hundreds of civilian lives. Sounds pretty aggressive to me. Read the psychological evaluations, Yunji said. Every mission report says the same thing. He never killed out of anger or hate. He only used violence to protect his team or innocent people. His commanding officers noted that he seemed to find no pleasure in combat, only necessity. The file contained detailed reports from Jin Ho's military service. Mission after mission, the pattern was the same. Jin Ho would take extreme risks to avoid killing when possible. When he did have to fight, it was always to save someone else, never for personal glory or revenge. Look at this, Yunji said, pointing to a specific incident report. His entire unit was trapped behind enemy lines. Jin Ho could have called for an airstrike that would have killed everyone in the area, including civilians. Instead, he went in alone and extracted his team one by one. He was shot 3 times but refused to leave anyone behind. Captain Hai Wan continued reading. It says he left the military after that mission. No explanation given. I talked to his former commanding officer, Yunji said. Jin Ho said he was tired of seeing people die, even enemies. He wanted to find a way to protect people without having to hurt others. Where is he now? Living with his grandmother in a mountain village. He grows vegetables and helps his neighbors. The local people think of him as just a quiet farmer. Captain Haiwan closed the file and looked at Yunji seriously. Doctor, you're asking me to recommend that we send a farmer against a monster that has conquered 17 worlds. I'm asking you to recommend that we send someone who might be immune to this creature's psychic feeding, Yunji replied. Someone who fights from love instead of hate. Captain Haiwan was quiet for a long moment. Outside the window, they could see one of the alien ships hanging in the sky like a dark cloud. The deadline was approaching fast. Even if you're right about this psychic feeding theory, Haiwan said finally, this Jinho would still have to actually defeat the creature physically. A farmer against a 12-foot monster. He's not just a farmer, Yunji said. He's a farmer who used to be one of our best soldiers, and he might be the only person on Earth who can face that thing without making it stronger. Captain Haiwan stood up and walked to the window. She had been a soldier for 15 years. She understood the value of strength and training and advanced weapons. But she also understood that sometimes the obvious choice was the wrong choice. Where did you say this village was? She asked. 2 hours later, a military helicopter flew toward the mountains carrying Captain Haiwan and Dr. Yunji. Below them, they could see the peaceful countryside, farms, and forests that seemed untouched by the alien crisis hanging over the world. In his grandmother's garden, Jinho was harvesting the last of the summer vegetables when he heard the helicopter approaching. He looked up at the sky and sighed. Somehow he knew his quiet life was about to end. Sunja came out of the house and stood beside him, watching the helicopter circle their village before landing in the small field behind their home. I suppose they've come for you, she said calmly. Jinho nodded. He had been expecting this since he saw the alien broadcast. Deep in his heart, he had known that his past would catch up with him eventually. I don't want to go, grandmother, he said. Sunja took his hand in her wrinkled fingers. No, child, but sometimes we don't get to choose what the world asks of us. Captain Haiwan and Dr. Yunji walked slowly up the dirt path to Jinho's house. The village was so quiet they could hear birds singing in the trees. Children peeked out from behind their mothers' skirts to stare at the strangers in military uniforms. Jinho was waiting for them on his grandmother's porch. He wore simple farmer's clothes and his hands were dirty from working in the garden. He looked nothing like the enhanced super soldiers the world expected to fight the alien champion. Jinho? Captain Haiwan asked. Yes, he replied simply. I'm Captain Haiwan. This is Dr. Yunji. We need to talk to you about the alien challenge. Jinho nodded and gestured for them to sit on the wooden chairs on the porch. Sunja brought them tea in small ceramic cups, the kind used in the village for special occasions. You want me to fight the alien, Jinho said. It wasn't a question. Dr. Yunji leaned forward. We believe you might be the only person who can win. Why me? Jinho asked. I'm not enhanced like the military champions. I don't have cybernetic parts or genetic modifications. I'm just a farmer now. That's exactly why, Yunji explained. We think the alien champion gets stronger when his opponents feel fear and anger. Most fighters would make him more powerful just by wanting to defeat him. Jinho listened quietly as she explained her theory about Kethmora's psychic feeding ability. He asked few questions, but his eyes showed he understood the implications. You think I can fight without fear or anger? He asked when she finished. Your military records suggest you might be able to, Captain Haiwan said. You have a different motivation than most soldiers. Sunja, who had been listening from the doorway, came out and sat beside her grandson. Tell them about your last mission, she said gently. Jinho was quiet for a long moment. His hands rested on his knees, and the visitors could see small scars on his knuckles from old fights. My unit was trapped, he said finally. We were in a city where civilians were caught between two armies. I could have called for heavy weapons to clear our escape route, but it would have killed innocent families. He paused, remembering. So, I went in alone. Not to kill the enemy, but to create a path for my team to escape. I thought about those families the entire time. I thought about their children who deserved to grow up safe. That's when you were wounded? Yunji asked. 3 times, Jinho said, touching his left shoulder unconsciously. But everyone got out, my team and most of the civilians. Why did you leave the military after that? Captain Haiwan asked. Jinho looked at his grandmother, then back at the visitors. Because I realized that even when I fought for the right reasons, people still died. I wanted to find a different way to protect people. So I came here to learn from my grandmother. Sunja smiled and patted his hand. He grows the best vegetables in 3 villages now, she said proudly. Dr. Yunji felt her heart sink. This gentle farmer seemed like a good man, but could he really face a 12-foot alien monster? Could someone who grew vegetables defeat a creature that had conquered 17 worlds? As if reading her thoughts, Jinho stood up and walked to the edge of the porch. In the distance, they could see one of the alien ships hanging in the sky. How much time do we have? He asked. 18 hours, Captain Haiwan replied. Jinho nodded slowly. If I agree to do this, what preparation can you give me? We have the best trainers and equipment on Earth, Haiwan said. We can enhance your reflexes, give you advanced weapons, provide armor that can stop most attacks. No, Jinho said quietly. If Dr. Yunji is right, then using weapons of aggression would make the creature stronger. I would need to fight as myself, not as an enhanced warrior. Sunja stood up and put her hand on her grandson's shoulder. The choice is yours, Jinho, but remember what I told you about the soldier who saved our village during the war. Jinho closed his eyes and took a deep breath. When he opened them, there was something different in his expression. Not anger or determination, but a quiet resolve. I'll do it, he said, but I need to prepare in my own way. An hour later, Jinho was in the village temple with Dong-wook, the old monk who had taught him meditation when he first came to the mountains. Dong-wook had been a martial arts master before he became a monk, and he understood both fighting and inner peace. The alien feeds on aggressive emotions, Jinho explained. I need to learn how to fight while feeling only compassion. Dong-wook nodded. This is the highest form of martial arts, he said. To protect without hatred, to fight without anger. Few people ever master this. They spent hours in meditation and practice. Dong-wook taught Jinho breathing techniques to stay calm under pressure. They practiced movements that flowed like water instead of striking like hammers. Remember, Dong-wook said as they trained, you are not trying to destroy your opponent. You are trying to protect everyone who cannot protect themselves. Meanwhile, Dr. Yu Jin arrived from Seoul with basic protective gear. Not advanced armor or weapons, but simple clothing that could absorb some impact and a wooden staff that felt natural in Jinho's hands. This is all I can give you, Yu Jin said apologetically. Anything more aggressive might trigger the creature's feeding response. Jinho tested the weight of the staff. It was made from bamboo grown in the mountains, strong but flexible. It felt right in his hands. As evening approached, news crews began arriving in the village. Word had spread that Earth's champion had been chosen, and reporters wanted to see the man who would face Kethmora. When they saw Jinho, many of them looked confused or disappointed. Where were the cybernetic enhancements? Where were the advanced weapons? This looked like an ordinary man, not humanity's greatest warrior. General Byung-ho arrived by helicopter just before sunset. He was one of Earth's most experienced military commanders, and he looked very unhappy. This is madness, he told Captain Haiwan privately. We're sending a farmer against a monster. We're dooming our entire species. The enhanced soldiers would lose, Haiwan replied. Dr. Yoonji's theory makes sense. Theory! General Byung-ho exploded. We're betting the survival of humanity on a theory. Jin-ho overheard the argument and approached the general. Sir, I understand your concerns. I'm scared too. Then why are you doing this? Byung-ho asked. Jin-ho looked back at the village where children were playing in the evening light. Old people sat outside their homes, talking quietly about their fears for tomorrow. Families were having dinner together, not knowing if it might be their last night on Earth. Because someone has to, Jin-ho said simply. And maybe being scared isn't the worst thing. Maybe it means I'll remember what I'm fighting for. That night, Jin-ho sat with his grandmother under the stars. The alien ships blocked out part of the sky, but the stars still shone around them. Are you ready? Sunja asked. No, Jin-ho said honestly. But I don't think anyone could be ready for something like this. Sunja took his hand. The soldier who saved our village during the war told me something once. He said that courage isn't about not being afraid. Courage is about being afraid and still choosing to protect others. What if I fail, grandmother? What if everyone dies because I wasn't strong enough? Sunja was quiet for a long moment, looking up at the stars. Then you will fail while trying to save people, not hurt them. There is honor in that kind of failure. As Jin-ho prepared for sleep, news reports showed crowds gathering around the world to watch the coming battle. Billions of people would witness humanity's fate being decided by a gentleman who grew vegetables and meditated with monks. In the alien ship hanging over Seoul, Kethmora waited in his chamber. For centuries, he had faced warriors who came to him filled with rage and the desire for victory. Tomorrow would bring another frightened opponent whose fear would make him stronger. But something felt different this time, something he couldn't quite understand. For the first time in longer than he could remember, the alien champion felt a strange sensation in his chest. It took him a moment to recognize what it was. Uncertainty. The morning of the battle arrived with clear skies and a gentle breeze. Jin-ho woke before sunrise and spent an hour in meditation with Dong-wook. They sat in silence, breathing deeply, preparing his mind for what was to come. Sunja made him a simple breakfast of rice and vegetables from their garden. She moved slowly around the kitchen as if trying to make the morning last longer. Eat well, she said, setting the bowl in front of him. You'll need your strength. Jin-ho ate slowly, tasting each bite. The vegetables were from seeds his grandmother had saved for decades. The rice came from fields he had helped plant. Everything tasted like home. By mid-morning, helicopters began arriving to take Jin-ho to Seoul. The whole village came out to see him off. Children who had played in his garden brought him flowers. Old men who had shared tea with him bowed respectfully. Mrs. Kim from the next farm pressed a small cloth bag into his hands. What's this? Jin-ho asked. Soil from your grandmother's garden, she said. So you remember where you come from? Jin-ho tucked the bag into his pocket and hugged his grandmother goodbye. Sunja held him tightly for a moment, then stepped back and looked into his eyes. Remember, she whispered, fight like the soldier who saved our village. Fight from love, not hate. The flight to Seoul took 30 minutes. Through the helicopter window, Jin-ho could see crowds of people lining the roads, looking up at the sky. Some held signs supporting him. Others prayed. Many just looked scared. The arena had been constructed overnight in the center of Seoul. It was a massive sphere made of some kind of alien metal that seemed to shift and change color in the sunlight. Thousands of people surrounded it, held back by military barriers. Inside a preparation room near the arena, Jin-ho changed into the simple protective clothing Dr. Yoo-jin had provided. It looked like ordinary fabric, but it would absorb some impact. If he was thrown against the arena walls, Captain Hai-wan came to see him before the battle. How do you feel? She asked. Terrified, Jinho said honestly. But ready. Dr. Yunji arrived with monitoring equipment. I'll be watching the psychic readings during the fight, she explained. If my theory is correct, we should see Keith Mora's power levels remain stable instead of increasing. And if your theory is wrong? Jinho asked. Yunji looked uncomfortable. Then we'll see his power spike immediately, and the fight will be over very quickly. General Byung-ho entered the room, his face grim. The alien ambassador has confirmed the rules, he said. Single combat, no weapons except what you carry yourself, fight continues until one opponent cannot continue. What happens if I win? Jinho asked. They leave Earth and never return, Byung-ho replied. What happens if you lose? Well, we probably won't be around to worry about it. Dongwook arrived carrying Jinho's bamboo staff. The old monk had spent the morning in prayer, blessing the simple weapon with ancient words of protection. This is not for attacking, Dongwook reminded Jinho as he handed over the staff. It's for balance, for defense, for redirecting force. Fight like water, not like fire. Jinho held the staff and felt its familiar weight. For a moment, he wasn't a champion representing all of humanity. He was just a man holding a piece of bamboo, trying to do the right thing. Outside, loudspeakers announced that the battle would begin in 30 minutes. Around the world, billions of people stopped what they were doing to watch. Schools dismissed. Classes. Offices closed. Families gathered around televisions and computers and phones. The arena began to change. The metal sphere split open like a flower, revealing a circular fighting space inside. The floor was smooth and white, with strange symbols carved around the edges. Above the arena, the air itself seemed to shimmer, creating a dome of energy that would contain the battle. Kethemora emerged from the alien ship first. The crowd's reaction was immediate and terrifying. People screamed and pushed backward as waves of psychic fear washed over them. Even through the energy barriers, his presence was overwhelming. The alien champion stood 12 feet tall, his obsidian skin reflecting the sunlight like polished stone. His eyes burned with red fire, and when he moved, the ground cracked under his massive feet. He carried no weapons, but his hands ended in claws that could tear through steel. Kethemora entered the arena and took his position at one end of the fighting circle. The air around him seemed to darken, and the temperature dropped several degrees. He had fought this battle hundreds of times before. Another primitive species would send their strongest warrior. That warrior would come filled with aggression and the desire to win. Their negative emotions would feed his power, making him unstoppable. But as he waited, something felt wrong. Usually he could sense his opponent's approach long before they entered the arena. Fear, anger, determination. These emotions called to him like a dinner bell. Today he felt almost nothing. Ambassador Vexatar spoke from floating platforms around the arena, his words broadcast to every screen on Earth. Behold, Kethemora, champion of the Dominion, he announced. Undefeated in 300 battles across 17 worlds. Let humanity send forth their greatest warrior, if they dare. The crowd fell silent as Jinho appeared at the entrance to the arena. He walked slowly, carrying only his bamboo staff and wearing simple protective clothing. Compared to the massive alien champion, he looked like a child approaching a giant. In the alien observation platforms, several Dominion officials began laughing. This was humanity's champion? This ordinary-looking man with no visible enhancements or advanced weapons? But Kethemora was not laughing. As Jinho entered the arena, the alien champion felt something he had not experienced in centuries. Instead of the usual flood of aggressive emotions that fed his power, he sensed something entirely different. Calm. Compassion. And underneath it all, a steady stream of love. Not for victory or glory, but for the people this human wanted to protect. For the first time in his long existence as the Dominion's weapon, Kethmora felt confused. Jinho walked to his position at the opposite end of the arena. The space between them seemed enormous. He could feel the alien's psychic pressure trying to overwhelm him with fear, but instead of fighting it, he acknowledged it and let it pass through him like wind through trees. He thought about his grandmother's garden, about the children in his village playing in the evening light, about all the people on Earth who deserved to see another sunrise. Dr. Yunji watched her monitoring equipment with growing amazement. Instead of the power spike they had seen in recordings of previous battles, Kethmora's readings were actually decreasing slightly. "It's working," she whispered to Captain Haiwan. "He's not feeding the creature's power." In the arena, Ambassador Vextar raised his arm to signal the beginning of combat. "Let the trial begin," he declared. Kethmora moved first, crossing the B arena in 3 massive strides. His speed was incredible for something so large. He swung one clawed hand at Jinho with enough force to shatter stone. Jinho didn't try to block the attack or meet it with force. Instead, he flowed to one side like water, letting the alien's momentum carry him past. The claws whistled through, empty air where Jinho had been standing a moment before. The human turned and struck with his staff, not trying to hurt the alien champion, but aiming for pressure points that might slow him down. The bamboo bounced off Kethmora's stone-like skin without seeming to cause any damage. But something had changed. For the first time in memory, Kethmora had swung at an opponent and missed. Not because his target was faster or stronger, but because they had simply not been where he expected them to be. The alien champion spun around and attacked again, this time with both hands. Again, Jinho moved like flowing water, never in the same place long enough to be caught. He struck back, with his staff, always aiming to slow or redirect rather than to cause pain. In the crowd, people began to murmur in confusion. This didn't look like any battle they had ever seen. Where was the clash of titans? Where were the devastating attacks and dramatic counterstrikes? Instead, they watched something that looked almost like a dance. The massive alien pursuing, the small human flowing away, neither seeming to gain a clear advantage. But in the monitoring stations, Dr. Yunji was seeing something remarkable. Kethmora's power levels were not just staying stable, they were slowly decreasing. Without aggressive emotions to feed on, the alien champion was running on reserves alone. For the first time in 300 battles, Kethmora was getting weaker instead of stronger. And deep in the alien's ancient mind, buried memories began to stir. Memories of a time before the Dominion. Memories of fighting not to conquer, but to protect. Memories of what he had been before they made him into a weapon. The battle continued for what felt like hours, but was only minutes. Jinho moved constantly, never staying in one place long enough for Kethmora to land a solid hit. His bamboo staff struck again and again at joints and pressure points, not trying to cause pain but to slow the giant's movements. Kethmora had never experienced anything like this. Every opponent he had faced before came at him with fury and determination. They wanted to defeat him, to prove their strength, to win glory for their species. Their aggressive emotions had fed his power, making him larger and stronger with each passing moment. But this small human felt different. When Kethmora reached into Jinho's mind, seeking the familiar taste of fear and anger, he found something else entirely. He found thoughts of children playing in a garden, images of an old woman smiling on a porch, memories of growing vegetables and sharing meals with neighbors. Most confusing of all, Kethmora sensed that Jinho felt sorry for him. The alien champion stumbled, his massive foot catching on the arena floor. In 300 battles, he had never lost his balance. His opponent's aggression had always fed him steady streams of power, keeping his body coordinated and strong. Now, for the first time in centuries, Kethmora was running on his own reserves. And those reserves were not unlimited. Jinho noticed the stumble immediately. Instead of pressing his attack, he stepped back and lowered his staff. "Are you hurt?" Jinho asked in broken galactic standard. The question hit Kethmora like a physical blow. When had anyone ever asked if he was hurt? He was a weapon, a tool of conquest. No one cared about his pain, but this human warrior had just asked about his well-being in the middle of a battle that would determine the fate of his entire species. In the observation platforms, Ambassador Vextar leaned forward with concern. Something was wrong. Kethmora should have crushed this primitive human in the first few seconds. Instead, the champion seemed to be struggling. "Kethmora!" Vextar called out. "End this now!" The alien champion heard his master's voice and forced himself back into fighting stance. He had been conditioned for centuries to obey. Pain, doubt, and hesitation were weaknesses to be suppressed. But as he looked at Jinho standing peacefully across the arena, Kethmora felt something stirring in the deepest parts of his mind, memories that had been buried under layers of conditioning and control. He remembered his real name, the one he had before the Dominion captured him. He remembered his home world, green and beautiful, with crystal cities that sang in the wind. He remembered his family, and he remembered the day the Dominion came. Kethmora attacked again, but his movements were less coordinated now. The memories were distracting him, making it hard to focus on the battle. Jinho continued to flow around, his attacks, always moving, always just out of reach. "I know you don't want to do this," Jinho said during a brief pause in the fighting. He was breathing hard but not afraid. "I can see it in your eyes." Silence. Kethmora roared, but his voice cracked slightly. "I am the champion of the Dominion. I have conquered 17 worlds." How many of those worlds had families? Jinho asked quietly. How many had children who just wanted to play in gardens and grow up safe? The words cut through Kethmora's conditioning like a knife. He saw flashes of memory. Cities burning, families separated, children crying as their parents were taken away. All because of him. All because he had been too weak to resist the Dominion's control. Jinho noticed tears forming in the alien's burning eyes. Real tears, glowing with the same red light as his gaze. "What were you before they made you into this?" Jinho asked gently. Kethmora staggered backward as if he had been struck. The question unlocked something deep in his mind. Something the Dominion had tried very hard to bury. He had been Kethvallen once, a protector of his people, a guardian of the crystal cities. He had fought not to conquer, but to defend. His strength had come not from feeding on others' fear, but from his love for those he protected, until the day the Dominion came with their mind control technology and their psychic chains. They had captured him, broken his will, and turned him into a weapon against everything he had once stood for. "My name," Kethmora whispered, his voice suddenly smaller. "My name was Kethvallen." Dr. Yunji watched her instruments in amazement. The alien's power readings were dropping rapidly now. But more than that, she was detecting massive changes in his brain patterns. It was as if two different minds were fighting for control of the same body. Jinho sensed the struggle happening inside his opponent. He had seen something similar in soldiers returning from war, the battle between who they had been forced to become and who they really were inside. "Kethvallen, Jinho," said softly, using the alien's real name. "You can stop fighting now." But even as he spoke, Jinho saw Ambassador Vextar activating some kind of device on his platform. Suddenly, Kethmora's eyes blazed brighter with red light, and he let out a roar of pain and fury. "Kethmora!" Vextar commanded through the psychic link. "You will obey! Destroy the human! Destroy them all!" The alien champion clutched his head as two sets of commands warred in his brain. The Dominion's conditioning fought against his awakening memories, causing him physical agony. Jinho could see what was happening. He dropped his staff and approached the suffering alien, ignoring the danger. "Fight it," Jinho said urgently. "Remember who you were. Remember who you're really fighting for." But the psychic control was too strong. Kethmora's conditioning reasserted itself, and he lashed out blindly. His massive hand caught Jinho across the chest, sending the human flying across the arena. Jinho hit the wall hard and slumped to the ground, his simple protective clothing torn and bloodied. The crowd gasped in horror as their champion struggled to get back to his feet. Kethmora advanced on the fallen human, his movements once again controlled and mechanical. The Dominion's psychic chains had reclaimed him, burying his true self under layers of enforced obedience. But as he raised his clawed hand for the killing blow, Kethmora looked down at Jinho's face. The human was hurt and bleeding, but his eyes showed no hatred or fear. Instead, Jinho looked up at him with something that shook the alien to his core: compassion. Even now, facing death, this strange human felt sorry for him. "I forgive you," Jinho whispered. "This isn't who you really are." The words broke something inside Kethmora's mind. The psychic chains that had bound him for centuries suddenly felt less solid. The love and forgiveness radiating from this small human was like acid on the bonds that held his true self prisoner. For the first time in longer than he could remember, Kethvalan began to fight back against his captors. The battle for Kethmora's soul had begun, and the fate of both Earth and the enslaved champion hung in the balance. In the observation platforms, Ambassador Vexitar realized that something had gone terribly wrong. The humans' compassion was doing something to their greatest weapon that centuries of rebellion had never accomplished. It was setting him free. Kethmora stood frozen above Jinho, his clawed hand raised but trembling. Inside his mind, two different voices fought for control. The Dominion's conditioning screamed at him to kill the human, to complete his mission, to prove his worth as a weapon. But underneath that artificial programming, his true self was clawing its way back to the surface. Kethvalan remembered his homeworld now. He remembered the crystal cities that sang with the voices of his people. He remembered his mate, Silandra, and their child, Velkoth. He remembered the day the Dominion ships had darkened their sky, just like they had darkened Earth's sky 3 days ago. Jinho struggled to sit up, wincing from the pain in his ribs. But instead of backing away from the massive alien looming over him, he reached out slowly and touched Kethmora's arm. "I can see your real self fighting to get out," Jinho said softly. "Don't let them control you anymore." The touch was gentle, without fear or aggression. It reminded Kethvalan of how his child used to touch his arm when asking for comfort. The memory hit him like lightning. "Velkoth," he whispered, his voice breaking. "My child. What did they do to my child?" Ambassador Vexitar saw the danger immediately. He activated the psychic control device at maximum power, sending waves of pain through Kethmora's brain. "You have no child!" Vexitar's voice echoed in the alien's mind. "You have no past! You are Kethmora, champion of the Dominion! Kill the human now!" Kethmora screamed and clutched his head as the competing commands tore at his consciousness. His massive body convulsed with pain as the psychic chains tried to reassert control. But Jinho didn't run. Instead, he stood up slowly and placed both hands on the alien's arm. "Breathe," Jinho said, using the meditation techniques Dongwook had taught him. "Find your center. Remember who you choose to be." Dr. Yunji watched her instruments in fascination and horror. The readings showed a massive psychic battle happening inside Kethmora's mind. Two completely different personality patterns were fighting for dominance. "He's breaking free," she whispered to Captain Hai Wan. "The conditioning is losing its grip." But Vexitar wasn't finished. If psychic control wouldn't work, he would try direct threats. "Kethmora!" the ambassador called out through the arena's speakers. "Obey, or we will destroy your homeworld completely." Every crystal city will burn. Every survivor will die. The Abba threat should have forced immediate compliance. For centuries, the possibility of his people's complete extinction had kept Kethvalan enslaved. But now he looked at Jin Ho, this small human who had shown him more compassion in minutes than the Dominion had shown in centuries. He thought about Earth's children playing in gardens, about families sharing meals, about all the simple joys that his own people had once known. No, Kethvalan said quietly. The word echoed through the arena like thunder. In 300 battles, Kethmora had never refused a direct command. No? Vextar's voice rose in disbelief. No, Kethvalan repeated louder this time. I will not be your weapon anymore. He turned away from Jin Ho and faced the observation platforms, where the Dominion officials watched in growing alarm. My name is Kethvalan, he declared, his voice carrying across the arena and through the broadcast systems to billions of viewers. I was a protector of the crystal cities of Valdara. I had a family. I had a life. And you took it all from me. Ambassador Vextar activated emergency protocols. Across the Dominion fleet, weapons systems powered up. If they couldn't control their champion, they would destroy him and the planet together, but Kethvalan was no longer alone. Jin Ho stood beside him, staff in hand, ready to fight alongside his former opponent. You don't have to face them by yourself, Jin Ho said. Around the world, something extraordinary began to happen. People who had been watching the battle in fear and desperation suddenly felt hope. If this gentle farmer could stand with an alien giant against an empire, what could they all accomplish together? In the arena, Kethvalan felt power flowing through, him that was different from anything he had experienced in centuries. Not the dark energy that came from feeding on fear and hatred, but something cleaner and stronger. The power of choice. The power of fighting for something he believed in rather than something he was forced to do. We need to get to the ship, Kethvalan told Jin Ho. The control device that enslaves champions like me. If we can destroy it, others might break free. 2, Jin Ho nodded. How many others are there? 17 champions from 17 conquered worlds, Kethvalan replied. All of them enslaved like I was. All of them forced to destroy their own people's hope. The alien transport pods began launching from the ships overhead. Dominion soldiers were coming to retake their champion by force. But as the first pod landed in the arena, something unexpected happened. Instead of running away, the human crowd began moving forward. Soldiers, civilians, children. They formed a protective circle around Jin Ho and Kethvalan. You want our champion? General Byung Ho called out, his weapon drawn. You'll have to go through all of us. Dr. Yunji was broadcasting everything to the galactic audience. Across known space, enslaved populations watched as a single world stood up to the Dominion Alliance. On 17 conquered planets, people began to whisper about rebellion. Ambassador Vexistar realized too late what had happened. By bringing their greatest weapon to Earth, they had given him the one thing that could break his conditioning, an opponent who fought with love instead of hatred. And now that weapon was turning against them. Kethvalan looked at the crowd of humans willing to fight beside him and felt something he thought was lost forever. He felt like a protector again instead of a destroyer. Thank you, he said to Jin Ho. You have given me back my soul. Jin Ho smiled despite the pain from his injuries. We protect each other. That's what families do. As the Dominion soldiers advanced, Kethvalan raised his massive fists. But now he fought not as Kethmora the enslaved champion, but as Kethvalan the protector, and for the first time in centuries he was fighting for something he believed in. The real battle was just beginning. The Dominion soldiers poured from their transport pods like an army of metal insects. They wore powered armor that gleamed silver in the sunlight, and their weapons hummed with deadly energy. Each soldier stood 8 feet tall and moved with mechanical precision. But they had never faced anything like what they encountered in the Soul Arena. Thousands of humans had formed defensive circles around Jin-Ho and Keth-Valen. They had no advanced weapons or armor, but they had something the Dominion didn't understand: the willingness to stand together against impossible odds. Keth-Valen fought like he hadn't fought in centuries. Instead of being a mindless weapon of destruction, he was protecting people again. His massive fists crushed through Dominion armor as if it were made of paper. His roar of defiance echoed across the city. Jin-Ho moved through the battle like flowing water, his bamboo staff striking at weak points in the soldiers' armor. He wasn't trying to kill them, but to disable their weapons and slow their advance. "The control ship!" Keth-Valen called out over the noise of battle. "We need to reach the control ship!" But even as he spoke, more transport pods landed around the arena. The Dominion was committing everything to recapture their escaped weapon. Dr. Yoon-ji watched from the command center as her instruments detected something incredible. The psychic broadcast that was supposed to show Earth's defeat was instead reaching every corner of the galaxy. And on world after world, enslaved populations were rising up. "Captain," she called to Hai-Wan, "look at these readings. The rebellion is spreading. On the planet Zephyria, where the Dominion champion Hexathara had conquered 3 years ago, people poured into the streets. They had watched their own champion break free from his chains, and now they knew escape was possible." On the mining world of Corvash, workers abandoned their posts and marched on the Dominion citadel. Their champion, Morgathan, had been taken from them as a child and turned into a weapon. Now they saw hope of getting him back. Across 17 worlds, the same pattern repeated. The sight of Keth-Valen fighting alongside humans instead of destroying them had shattered something that the Dominion had thought was unbreakable: the belief that resistance was hopeless. But in the Soul Arena, the immediate battle was far from won. Ambassador Vexitar had landed with his personal guard, and they were advancing on Jin-Ho and Keth-Valen with weapons that could level city blocks. "Surrender the escaped slave," Vexitar demanded through his armor's speakers. "Return to your homes, and we will make your deaths quick." "His name is Keth-Valen," Jin-Ho replied, standing protectively near his friend despite his injuries. "And he's not going back to being your slave." Vexitar raised his weapon, a staff that crackled with purple energy. "Then you will all die together." But before he could fire, something unexpected happened. The crowd of humans around the arena began to sing. It started with one voice, a child somewhere in the back of the crowd. Then others joined in, and soon thousands of people were singing an old Korean song about standing together against darkness. The melody was simple but beautiful, and it carried across the battlefield like a prayer. Keth-Valen stopped fighting for a moment, listening to the music. He remembered similar songs from his home world, melodies that his people had sung during their festivals of unity. The memory made his eyes burn with tears that glowed like red stars. The Dominion soldiers hesitated too. They had been programmed to understand many things, but music made from hope and defiance was not among them. Jin-Ho used the moment of confusion to act. He sprinted toward the nearest Dominion transport pod, his bamboo staff ready. He had noticed something during the battle. The soldiers' armor had weak points at the joints, places where his simple weapon could disable their movement systems. Keth-Valen understood immediately and followed, clearing a path through the confused soldiers. Together they reached the transport pod and climbed aboard. "Can you fly this?" Jin-Ho asked. "The controls are similar to our ships from before the conquest," Keth-Valen replied, his massive hands moving over the control panel. "I remember." The pod lifted off just as Vexitar realized what was happening. Energy blasts from his weapon scorched the air around them, but they were already climbing toward the main Dominion ship. As they rose above the city, Jin-Ho could see the scope of what was happening. The arena was just one small part of a much larger battle. Human military forces had engaged Dominion ships over Sol, and similar battles were beginning on other continents. But more importantly, he could see news broadcasts on the transport, pod's communication system. The rebellion wasn't limited to Earth anymore. Across the galaxy, enslaved worlds were fighting back. "Look," Kethvalan said, pointing to one of the screens, "Zephyria has declared independence, and Korvash and Maltara." On screen after screen, they watched as the Dominion's empire began to crumble. The sight of one champion breaking free had started a chain reaction that was spreading faster than the Dominion could contain. But they weren't safe yet. The main Dominion ship was enormous, bristling with weapons and defended by energy shields. As their small transport approached, defensive, systems locked onto them. "They're going to shoot us down," Jinho observed calmly. "Not if I can help it," Kethvalan replied. He activated the pod's communication system and spoke in the ancient language of his people, words that hadn't been heard in centuries. "I am Kethvalan of Valdara, rightful protector of the Crystal Cities. I invoke the old laws. I demand single combat with your champions." The response came immediately from the ship ahead. Another alien voice, speaking the same ancient language. "I am Thexmori of Kalos, enslaved champion of the Dominion. I remember you, brother." "Thexmori," Kethvalan whispered. "You were taken in the same raid as me." "The human beside you," Thexmori continued, his voice growing stronger. "He fights like the old protectors used to fight, with honor, with love." Jinho couldn't understand the words, but he could hear the change in tone. Something was happening on the ship ahead. The defensive systems powered down. A docking bay opened, in the side of the massive vessel. "Come aboard, brother," Thexmori called. "It's time we finished what they started 300 years ago." As their transport pod entered the docking bay, Jinho saw that they were not alone. Other champions were there, aliens from different worlds, but all with the same look in their eyes, the look of people remembering who they used to be. Kethvalan stepped out of the pod and embraced Thexmori, a reunion of brothers in arms separated by centuries of slavery. "How many of us are awake?" Kethvalan asked. "7 so far," Thexmori replied. "The others are fighting the conditioning, but your example is helping them break free." Jinho looked around at the assembled champions. These were the weapons the Dominion had used to conquer 17 worlds. But now they stood together as allies, remembering their true purpose as protectors rather than destroyers. "What do we need to do?" Jinho asked. Kethvalan translated the question, and all the champions turned to look at the small human who had started this rebellion with nothing but compassion and a bamboo staff. "We destroy the control center," Thexmori replied through Kethvalan's translation. "But it's heavily defended, and Vextar will be there with his personal army." Jinho nodded and checked his staff for damage. It was cracked in several places, but still functional. "Then let's go finish this," he said. As they moved deeper into the ship, Jinho couldn't help but smile despite the danger. He had come here to fight one alien champion. Now, he was part of an army of champions fighting to free the galaxy. Sometimes, he thought, the most powerful weapon against tyranny is simply refusing to hate your enemies. The final battle was about to begin. The control center of the Dominion ship was a vast chamber filled with pulsing lights and humming machinery. At its heart stood a massive device that looked like a crystal tree made of black metal. Psychic energy flowed through its branches like poisonous sap, controlling champions across the galaxy. Ambassador Vexitar waited for them with his elite guard. The aliens wore ceremonial armor decorated with the symbols of conquered worlds, and their weapons were the most advanced the Dominion had ever created. "So, the escaped slaves come to destroy their chains," Vextar said as Jinho and the 7 freed champions entered the chamber. How touching, and how futile. Kethvalan stepped forward, his red eyes blazing with centuries of suppressed anger. You took our families, you destroyed our worlds, you turned us into weapons against everything we loved, and we made you strong, Vextar replied without emotion. Before the Dominion, you were weak protectors of weak peoples. We gave you purpose. You gave us slavery, Thexmori said, his voice like grinding stone. Jinho watched the exchange and felt the familiar tension of approaching violence. He could sense the freed champion's anger, and he understood it completely. These beings had suffered for centuries, forced to destroy the very people they had sworn to protect. But he also knew that anger would make them vulnerable. The Dominion thrived on negative emotions, grew stronger from hatred and rage. Wait, Jinho said quietly, stepping between the champions and their former masters. Kethvalen looked down at his small human friend. Jinho, they must pay for what they've done. Yes, Jinho agreed, but not the way they expect. He turned to face Ambassador Vextar and his guards. These aliens had built an empire on fear and hatred. They understood those emotions, knew how to use them as weapons. They did not understand forgiveness. I know what you did to them, Jinho said to Vextar. You took children from their families and broke their minds. You forced them to destroy their own people. You built an empire on suffering. Vextar raised his weapon, expecting the human to attack in rage. And what will you do about it, little protector? Will you kill me? Will you take revenge? Jinho was quiet for a moment, thinking about his grandmother's garden, about children playing in villages, about all the simple joys that made life worth protecting. No, he said finally. I'm going to do something you don't understand. He set down his bamboo staff and walked slowly toward the control device. Vextar and his guards tracked him with their weapons, confused by his lack of aggression. Jinho placed his hands on the black crystal tree at the center of the chamber. Immediately, psychic energy flooded into his mind. He felt the pain of every enslaved champion, the anguish of every conquered world, the despair of billions of beings who had lost hope. The Dominion had built their control system to channel negative emotions, but Jinho filled it with something else entirely. He thought about Kethvalen's joy when he remembered his real name. He thought about the songs humans had sung in the arena. He thought about all the small acts of kindness that made civilization possible, sharing food with neighbors, caring for the elderly, protecting children. The crystal tree began to crack. Impossible, Vexitar whispered. The control matrix feeds on psychic energy. It should be draining your life force. It is, Jinho said, his voice growing weaker as the device pulled energy from him. But I'm not giving it fear or anger. I'm giving it love. The cracks spread through the crystal structure like lightning. Across the galaxy, enslaved champions suddenly felt their mental chains dissolving. On 17 worlds, people looked up at the sky as the psychic oppression that had clouded their minds for generations began to lift. But the process was killing Jinho. His hands were glowing where they touched the device, and his body was trembling. With the effort of channeling so much energy, Kethvalen moved to pull him away, but Jinho shook his head. Not yet, he gasped. Almost finished. Dr. Yunji, watching from Earth through the ship's communication systems, saw what was happening on her instruments. The psychic control network that had enslaved the galaxy was collapsing, but the feedback was burning through Jinho's nervous system. He's dying, she whispered to Captain Haiwan. The process will kill him. But Jinho had made his choice. He thought about Sunja teaching him to grow vegetables. He thought about children who would grow up free because of what happened here. Today, he thought about former enemies who could become friends. The crystal tree shattered completely. Across the galaxy, the last of the enslaved champions broke free. On Valdara, Kethvalen's home world, the surviving crystal cities began to sing again for the first time in 3 centuries. On 17 worlds, people stepped out of hiding and looked up at clear skies. Jinho collapsed. His hands burned and his body drained. Kethvalen caught him as he fell, cradling the small human gently in his massive arms. "Why?" Kethvalen asked, tears flowing down his obsidian cheeks. "Why sacrifice yourself for people you've never met?" Jinho smiled weakly. "Because that's what protectors do. We protect everyone, even former enemies." He looked at Ambassador Vextar, who stood frozen in shock as his empire crumbled around him. "Your people are free too now," Jinho told. The Dominion leader. "Free to choose who they want to be." Vextar stared at the human in disbelief. You destroyed everything we built. Our power, our control, our empire. "I gave you freedom," Jinho replied. "What you do with it is up to you." The ship around them began to shut down as its control systems failed. Emergency lights flickered on, and alarms sounded throughout the vessel. But Kethvalen was more concerned with his friend. Jinho's breathing was shallow, and his eyes were starting to close. "Stay with us," Kethvalen pleaded. "The medics are coming. Earth's doctors can help you." Jinho squeezed his friend's hand weakly. "Tell my grandmother. Tell her the vegetables will be ready for harvest soon." Around them, the freed champions gathered in a circle, these former weapons of conquest now standing as honor guards for the human who had shown them the path to freedom. Ambassador Vextar and his remaining guards made no move to attack. What was the point? Their empire was gone, destroyed not by superior weapons or military might, but by one person's refusal to respond to hatred with more hatred. As rescue ships from Earth docked with the failing Dominion vessel, Jinho drifted in and out of consciousness. But even in his weakened state, he could hear something beautiful, the sound of former enemies working together to save lives. Human medics worked alongside Dominion doctors to stabilize the wounded. Former champions helped evacuate civilians from damaged ships. The beginning of something new was growing from the ashes of the old empire. 3 days later, Jinho woke up in a hospital bed in Seoul. His hands were bandaged, and his body was weak, but he was alive. Through the window, he could see people in the streets celebrating not victory in war, but the beginning of peace. Kethvalen sat beside his bed, looking smaller somehow without his armor and weapons. He was reading from a tablet, learning to write in Korean. "How are the others?" Jinho asked. "Free," Kethvalen replied with a smile. "All of them. 17 worlds are celebrating their independence. And the Dominion, they're asking for help, rebuilding their society without slavery." Jinho nodded, too tired to speak but pleased with what he heard. "Your grandmother is coming to visit tomorrow," Kethvalen added. "She says the tomatoes are perfect this year." Jinho smiled and closed his eyes. Through the hospital window, he could hear children playing in the courtyard below. Human children and alien children, all playing together in the sunshine. It was the most beautiful sound in the galaxy. A week later, Jinho returned to his village in the mountains. The world had changed dramatically, but the important things remained the same. Sunja still sat on her porch, watching him work in the garden. Neighbors still shared meals and stories. But now, there were new neighbors too. Kethvalen had built himself a small house on the hill overlooking the village. Other freed champions had settled on different continents, learning to be protectors again instead of weapons. As Jinho knelt in the soil, pulling weeds from around the tomato plants, he felt a deep sense of contentment. The galaxy was still, healing from centuries of oppression, and there would be challenges ahead. But children were playing safely in gardens on 17 worlds. Former enemies were learning to trust each other. And somewhere in the mountains of Earth, an old woman and her grandson were growing vegetables together, proof that even the smallest acts of love could change the universe. The strongest human had turned out to be not the one with the biggest weapons or the most enhancements, but the one who understood that true strength comes from choosing compassion over conquest. And in that choice, the galaxy had found its freedom.